Hello there, and welcome to episode 2 of our political party broadcast, and by that I mean our A level USA course. This lesson we're going to be looking at party decline and party renewal, but before I do so, just a couple of notices. The first one is um, I recognize that the last one was probably quite long, so I'm going to try and truncate it a little bit, maybe be a little bit less rambly. I do apologize for that. The second thing is well done to everybody who did the pop quizzes. Please make sure you're doing them for those people who didn't. I won't be naming any names yet, but I will be naming and shaming soon enough. Um, yeah, I think it's a really good way of kind of just making sure that one, you're getting in the right kind of spirit of these things at these kind of unorthodox times, and two, it's just really gonna help you refresh your mind on some pretty challenging content. To that end, my pop quiz superstar for episode 1 was, drum roll please, I don't know if you can hear that, Anna Leary. Congratulations, Anna. I thought your answers were really, really fantastic. Great detail, really sound understanding of some pretty tricky concepts. So do keep it up. Um, Today, as I said, we're going to be looking at party decline and party renewal. So we're going to be looking at these competing theories. The prevailing theory being that parties, the political parties in America, i.e., the Democrats and the Republicans, are kind of on the way out, or they're not on the way out, that's too strong. Let's say they're declining in influence. They're not as important as they used to be. And we're going to look at why someone might say that and whether they're right. So we get started, I'll just have a quick look at the starter. Please do pause it to kind of consider your answers to this. But let's get started. Welcome to West Virginia, where in 2012, the Democrat Joe Manchin was elected to the Senate with 60% of the vote. However, in that same year, Barack Obama lost the presidential race by nearly 30 points. What does that tell us? Well, the first thing is we can kind of do a bit of recap and think about what voting phenomenon is that representative of. But more personally to our question here, what does that tell you about the uniformity and the strength of the Democratic Party? Okay. Any questions or answers that you might have, please do pop in the comments below. Right, we're going to get started by talking about party decline, and party decline is not a new phenomenon. In fact, party decline was called for by that chap on the board there. That chap is Theodore Roosevelt. He was once president of the United States, the first president to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and he also went blind in one eye after a boxing accident in the White House. Different times in the early 20th century, but interesting guy nonetheless. Now, the reason why I bring him to attention is because he actually created a political party which called for the end of political parties, the Progressive Party. The Progressive Party ran for the presidency with him as the candidate in 1912. He didn't win. I think it was Woodrow Wilson, I hope I got that right, who became president, a Democrat president. But we have, we can talk about this being spawned by this continued and in almost latent suspicion of political parties. The idea that political parties aren't best for American government. Okay, um, so as we fast forward through to the late 20th century and the early 21st century, we're going to explore whether that is the case or not. So today, the idea that US political parties are in decline is a prevalent one, with the growth of candidate driven elections serving as a warning sign for the waning influence that the party system seems to have. We're going to look at some phenomena which try and help explain why parties might be on the way out. Okay, and the first one is candidate selection. Now, if we think back to previous lessons, we've looked at the way candidates are selected, and I hope now you're kind of shouting into the screen saying, primaries and caucuses, primaries and caucuses. Very, very good if you are. But that wasn't always the case. Historically, presidential candidates were chosen by party grandees. I'm talking about the big players in parties, the fat cats in their smoke filled rooms, your big city mayors, so on and so forth, until, well, we'll talk about 1968 when the McGovern Fraser Commission came in, which really kick started the idea of using primaries as a way of determining presidential candidates. Now, that is really important to this lesson because by introducing primaries, all of a sudden parties become deprived of being the group that selects their candidates. That's really significant because they find it's harder for them to determine, whether a candidate adheres to their principles. And we get a looser connection between presidential candidates and party principle. And we've seen that in the most recent kind of iterations of our presidential campaigns. We'll go to 2016. 2016 was when we saw some outspoken anti-establishment candidates thrive, using political parties merely as a label for their candidacy. Two examples, really good ones to use in any essays or no marks that you might get. Bernie Sanders, 2016, he smashes the primaries, and it isn't until there's this surge of superdelegate power which backs Hillary Clinton that means that the establishment candidate, the party, the safe party candidate, comes to the fore and is the Democrat representative. We go one step further with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, very outspoken, very anti-establishment, promising to drain the swamp. Sorry, not the best impression. I'm sorry, but he goes from outsider to leader in the primary race, and eventually ends up being the candidate and goes one better and becomes president. Now, what does this show? It shows that we have these examples where people who can kind of buck the party trend and challenge the party line as well can achieve success. Now, if a party can't kind of wrangle its candidates successfully enough, then that is a strong indicator that they're starting to lose influence and be on the wane. We move on to relationship with voters because parties play, historically or traditionally rather, played a really important role in being the link, the go-between between the people and politicians. If a person wanted to see a politician, they would have to do it through a party mechanism. For example, a political rally. A political rally is a really good example of where people and politicians would come together, but you only have that if that's organized by your party. Likewise, question and answer sessions, town hall meetings, these are all party based activities. But then we get to the mid 20th century and something quite significant happens. Media, mass media comes in, television in particular. Now, we've got a picture of Richard Nixon there. He was a brilliant exponent of this. A politician who used television to directly present his views to the nation. And in doing that, I'm going to be try and be really cool here and use that. There we go. In doing that, there we go. Yeah, this party group is no longer needed. I can even do an arrow like that. I am so cutting edge. Instead, we have it's gone. Instead, we have a direct relationship between politicians and people. Now, that works both ways because opinion polls give politicians direct feedback as to what the people want. So instead of getting the information filtered through a party mechanism, they got it through the people directly. So we ask ourselves, what are parties needed for if they're not there to manage the relationship between voters? Now, we can go one further and start talking about Donald Trump again. He's a great example for things which kind of challenge traditional structures and frameworks because Donald Trump he might not be a master of many things, but he is a master of social media and he uses social media to great effect to directly engage with people at the cost of his own party mechanism often. So he's called out. I mean, today I read a tweet about from Trump about Mitt Romney, who'd just been tested negative for coronavirus, thankfully. But the tweet was a heavily politicized thing, suggesting he was happy that he wasn't infected with coronavirus, but even though he's been a weak Senate leader, he tried to remove him from his office, so on and so forth. So Donald Trump can circumvent the kind of the grand um, marquee figures of the the party political structure by directly appealing to the masses. It's very dangerous things for political parties, something that they need to get a handle on, really. Number three, and this is a really prominent one, alternative political movements. We have seen, especially in recent years, increased activity when it comes to people eschewing the conventional party structures. So, in fact, today, this is something that I learned in my research for this lesson. More Americans identify as independents than as members of a party. That's quite extraordinary when you think about it, because it suggests that people are kind of rallying against or railing against, sorry, the party system as a way of kind of vocalizing or representing one's political views. And we've seen that. I've given you two case studies here, and I would strongly recommend doing a bit of research into these just to get a better understanding as to what they are and what they represent. The Occupy movement. Now, the Occupy movement is kind of anti-austerity, anti-wealth inequality movement. So its main kind of its MO is to challenge the challenge the idea, or challenge the fact rather, that there is gross wealth inequality in America. That 1% own, I think, it's one third of the net wealth in America, which is, if true, is absolutely shocking. Um, and whilst it's perhaps not as popular now, in 2011, 2012, after the financial crash in 2008, there was a real groundswell to it, a real groundswell. Similarly, um, with the Republican system, this "Make America Great Again" um, movement, and it's interesting because Donald Trump did call it a movement as opposed to being part of the conventional party system. That led Donald Trump not just to the Republican candidacy, but also to the presidency. Now, what is doubly impactful about these alternative movements is that not only do they offer alternatives, they also affect the party systems themselves. Now, how they do that is they affect selection of candidates. So Tea Party candidates, a Tea Party movement's a really good example of that, and policy too. If you look at the pictures on the board, you've got Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. Would they have been as successful as they are now without things like the Occupy movement bringing a more kind of radicalized political voice to the mainstream? I'll leave that to you to determine. We'll finish off by just very quickly talking about why some people might respond to everything I've said so far and said, no, Mr. Ware, you're kind of taking this a bit too far. The parties aren't actually in decline. Um, Three things, and if you look at pages 317 and 318 in your textbooks, that will help with this, but I will just very quickly talk about them before I round off. Um, the first thing that might suggest that the parties are still relatively strong is just the state of American politics right now. Now, I don't say that critically. I mean, if you think about American politics, it is dominated by a two-party system, as we've looked at in earlier lessons. Both houses are completely composed, not the same word really, of party politicians. You're either Democrat or Republican. You have been that's been the case for a good 150 years. Also, parties have survived scandals and issues and come back just as strong and just as kind of durable, if you will. If we think about the Republican Party, the years 1973, 74, the Watergate affair has come to the fore. The integrity of the Republican Party has been grossly mismanaged and undercut, and yet, 6 years later, the Republican Party is ushered, also a Republican candidate is ushered back into the presidency through Ronald Reagan, and it is so for another decade. So scandals don't seem to have hurt the Republican Party in that sense. Similarly, another thing which can hurt the Republican Party is, any political party, not just the Republican one, is a dilution of ideology. And we saw that with the Democrat Party in the 80s, where there was a growing leftward trend moving it away from the center. Typically, when parties move away from the center, it might not be so much the case now, they wane in popularity. But the Democrat Party survived that 80s kind of movement and came back with this new Democrat ideal, this centrism, not unlike the kind of new Labour ideal that we saw in Britain, um, and restored the significance and power of the Democratic Party, winning two elections on the bounce, 92, 96 with Bill Clinton. So there is a strong suggestion there that parties are a lot more durable than we might think. The last two, nationalisation and political campaigns, we've seen in earlier lessons that political campaigns are now no longer a localised 50 state thing. There's been a growing trend to try and adopt national platforms. Media has helped massively with that, but to try and promote the party with a national message. Now, whilst you don't have manifestos per se, as you would in Britain, what you do have are party platforms. We also have, and there are examples in your textbook which can reinforce this. We have examples of kind of national party messages being promoted across the country during election campaigns. And then the last one, perhaps one of the most prominent ones, partisanship in Congress is stronger than ever. Okay, the idea that the two parties can't agree on things. If we look at, for example, Trump's budget, whereby he tried to include billions of dollars to build his wall, that was met with a lot of hostility uh, in the Democrat House. They serve as a really good point that party politics still matters. Parties stop legislation from going through because of the ideologies that they hold, and their reluctance to engage in constructive kind of conversation with that other party. So those are three reasons why we might say that actually parties aren't as in decline as we might suggest. But I leave that down to you. It'd be a nice 25 marker to have, let's say. Hint, hint, hint. I don't know. Um, as ever, I'm going to attach a pop quiz to this lesson. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that like button. Sorry, I'm pointing to an imaginary like button there. But yeah, I hope you're all doing well. Keep strong, keep engaged, keep looking at the news as well, and show my homework to see if there are any developments in regards to how we're going to be delivering this thing in future. Any questions, you know where I am. I'd be more than happy to answer them as best as I can. Okay.